It's on. Yes? Bleep, 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 bleep. Okay. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead, take out your notes. We're going to continue with Rwanda. I want to do Rwanda today. Tomorrow, after the break, we will pick up with the Balkans, which is going to cover like all the stuff having to do with Yugoslavia, and Serbia, and Bosnia, and Kosovo, and then we'll have a test on that. I want to look. I'm anticipating probably having the test on that unit, maybe like April the 6th. Unless we can get it done by that Friday, but I'm thinking it'll probably take like good 4 days. Well, actually with you guys, because when do I see you? I'll see you guys twice after the break, right? Instead of every day, but I'll see you like for 90-minute increments, so same amount of time. Yeah, so when do we meet with you guys? After the break, first period B-Day. So first period, yeah, make sure you have all of your food stuff consumed before you come in here. And we'll have it all set up. Do you have, Ashton, I'm concerned, do you have enough room to like take notes and everything? Okay, good, all right. Because we'll have enough desks and so forth so you can all spread out. Mostly they'll be on this side, that side, and maybe a couple in the back. And I'll still be recording them. I'm sorry, let me finish and then I will call on you rather than just like, you're going to be a reporter at like the White House Correspondence or something. Mr. President, I've got a question for you. Yes. 8A. Yep. So 8As are going to be Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesday, Thursday. B-Days will be Wednesday, Friday. A-Days will be whatever. Excuse me, Mondays or whatever, yeah.
So we have Monday after the break completely off, right?
Oh, I think I might have something for you. I might have like a video thing. Yeah, and actually, to be honest, to get a really good grasp of the Rwanda thing, the whole kind of big picture, that Frontline documentary video is pretty encompassing, pretty intense, and yeah. So, yeah, we'll get you guys all trained. Everything's good to go. Questions, comments? Okay. We got only 2 of you. Thank you for getting your papers in, your IAs in to Mrs. Holliday. I really appreciate that. I got 2 more. I've already talked to 1 person to get that in, so that's all good to go. We're going to get you all trained up. So for our part, you're going to be in good shape going into the IB history exams, which are on May the 4th and 5th, which is a Tuesday and Wednesday. I think it's your first ones, if not among your first IB exams. Okay? All right. May the 4th be with you. And then Cinco de Mayo. Yeah, so those are the history ones. Yeah, there you go. Oh my God. All right, you guys ready? Let's do this. Okay, here we go. Shh. We will be giving more reference to the situation surrounding Hotel Rwanda. One of the things, actually several of the people involved as portrayed in that film are in your notes. They're going to be on the test, okay? In fact, one of the things I like about it is mostly true, although I will give you some perspective. Some of the people are like, yeah, really? No, what else is going on? It's a controversial period as we go into this. Obviously, very, very controversial, very sad, very terrible. Yeah, genocide. And what's going to be done about it? At the time, didn't seem like there was much. In fact, if you thought some of the episodes that were very difficult in the documentary and the film, let's actually just do a quick survey. You guys raise your hand. You're like, that was good. I'm glad we had a chance to watch that film in here. Okay, thank you. I was confirming that. Raise your hand if you're like, glad I had a chance to watch the documentary instead of the film. Okay, there you go. And actually, it's a very, very good documentary. I was glad to have that as an alternative. And in fact, I do encourage all of you guys, check that out. It's about 2 hours long, and it's just riveting. And some of it is very, very helpful because they talk about the before, the during, and the after as well, which is what is encompassed in this particular unit. So, was the hotel a safe place to hide? Turns out it ultimately was a fairly safe place to seek refuge. And it was interesting because one of the critics actually said, because it made sometimes the filmmaker, and it's not necessarily this is a story about Paul Rusesabagina, okay? But the decisions as far as what goes into the film are made by the filmmaker and, of course, the author who wrote the script initially. Write this down. Give some credit to the United Nations troops, because one of the critics actually said that there was Congolese troops that were among the United Nations troops that helped provide some protection there. And, of course, as you saw in the film, he's bribing, he's cajoling, he's doing everything he can to try and keep things as safe as possible and putting some pressure on the military leaders, because there's this weird dynamic there. You had the Interhamwe, which are like, who controls those guys? I mean, they refer to them in the movie as the crazy guys, right? I mean, and you got this, how many guys got like a little bit of a chill when like they were leaving and then you see another Interhamwe group with their really bright, colorful outfits and so forth, and they're scraping their machetes on the ground, and you're like, oh my gosh, here we go again. But then the RPF guys who were moving and advancing on Kigali, in that particular scene, they took them out. And so then they went to the refugee camp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we got a lot more layers of things to look at here with respect to the situation in Rwanda. Quick question.
Technically, did the RTLM control the Interhamwe? I mean, not like...
They're coordinated. The radio station?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely the coordination there. Yeah, so in a sense, they can, yeah, that's kind of like their media, Radio Corps of Engineers and so forth, whatever the Radio Corps, yeah. And yeah, so there is a connection there. And in fact, when we go through the people being held accountable, you're going to have Interhamwe leaders being held accountable and RTLM radio guys being held accountable too, which is good. All right, let's get to this. Some of this stuff is going to be very disturbing, but I think having seen everything already up until this point, you're going to be like, okay, we can deal with this. Was there safe places to go? What about churches? Churches, this is going to be one of the saddest things. And if we had more time, the Hotel Rwanda's got some really excellent additional features, including going back to visit places. And one of the places they go to visit was just outside of Kigali and so forth. It was a large church complex where literally thousands of people were killed. Because write this down. People were actually encouraged to go to church to seek refuge. And the government, the ones who were alive, right, the Hutu power people in the government who were carrying out the genocide, they were encouraging them to, and literally, here's the quote, it was like sweeping dry banana leaves into a pile to burn them more easily. Because, for example, when you got to a church, I'll show you this particular image and we'll give you two examples. When you got to the church thinking you're going to be safe, in fact, you weren't. It was just that much easier for the military and or the Interhamwe to go in and wipe you out. Okay? At the First Catholic Church in Rwanda at Kaboya, I can't read my own handwriting, but I've got it right there. Because it's one of the things that you guys right there. I had that one, didn't I? Okay. No, a different one. K-A-B-G-A-Y-I. 6,000 people killed. Okay? Is one of the first churches in Rwanda. K-A-B-G-A-Y-I. First Catholic Church in Rwanda. I should have put a video or a thing up there so it could be. 60,000 people killed. Yeah. This is where it's really bad because you look at it and you're like, well, were the clergy trying to stop it? Sometimes the clergy were. Sometimes the clergy weren't. Write down this guy's name. Athanasa Seromba. He's clergy, but he was actually helping to participate in the killing at the school. Excuse me, at the church, assisting the government. Question?
Oh, I don't think that was
It's okay, yeah. I believe so, yeah. I think that was the one. Yeah, I've got that written right down here and so forth. But he is one of the ones he's one of the clergy that was actually assisting, which is just like completely outrageous. Another church. This church in Kigali, the Ntarama Church, also people thought that was a refuge. There were 5,000 people gathered there, and they are killed. Okay? The whole place is going to be upturned. People are killed in the church, having sought refuge there. 5,000, yeah. Okay? Were you safe at school? No. Schools were also going to be targeted, particularly because there's schools, Tutsi, thinking that they're going to be safe there. There was a school called the Ito School, 2,000 killed during the very first morning. So, I mean, where you gather thinking that you're going to be safe, I mean, what places are you going to be safe if you gather in Rwanda? Well, if the RPF is in charge of it, you're cool there. Otherwise, there's not too many places. The Hotel Mikoline, not too many places where you're going to be safe. Yeah? 2,000 killed during the very first morning. Okay, so you see a lot of that taking place. Over 200,000 people in the country participating in the killing. Over 200,000 people participating in the actual killing. This is astounding when you consider, like, Nazi Germany. How many Nazis were actually participating in the killing and rounding up of Jews? Not as many. I mean, it was fairly efficient, done by the army, the SS units and so forth. But here you have literally, and you got a sense of that from the movie. They would go, you need to go kill these people. And so there were people who were killing people who didn't necessarily want to kill the people, but if they didn't, they would be seen as, Hutu traitor, and they would themselves be killed. Yeah.
The 200,000 that were killing while millions.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, who is going to bear the responsibility? A lot of people, as we go through this and kind of round it out and like try to get justice, it's going to be really hard because you're talking about a huge segment of the population. It's going to be very difficult, and I'll give the details of how they're actually going to deal with that. 60% of the people who were killed by machete. I think that came through quite clearly. All you needed was a cheap Chinese manufactured machete, hand it to you, and you could do some serious damage and take somebody's life. Were the Tutsis getting help from the RPF? Yes, we'll see that. The Tutsis are going to be getting help from the RPF. But as the fighting got started again, right, because, hello, ceasefire over, the RPF is going to be moving. And you got a sense from that. Here they are operating from a base just inside of Rwanda, having across from Uganda. What you saw kind of in the movie, by the time they arrive in Kigali, that was where the exchange was made. And so you probably have then those buses heading north as the RPF forces are heading south. Remember the general was saying, we're going to regroup in Gitarama. And Paul Rusesabagin is like, I don't want to go to Gitarama. How long did they stay in Gitarama? Obviously not very well. The RPF, you can write this down, it took them 100 days, and they're going to win the war. Yeah, they're going to win the war. They're going to defeat. And we'll look at all the kind of craziness and so forth that goes along with that. But the RPF, who is responsible for ending the genocide? It's going to be the RPF. It's not going to be the UN. It's not going to be the European or American forces. It's going to be the RPF.
Okay, so I remember what my last question was. How come UN soldiers were ordered not to fire?
I think the idea is that they didn't want to be seen as favoring one side over the other in a civil conflict. And you have that sometimes. That's just why sometimes, like, the United States is not as interested in participating in UN force allocations if we don't have as much control over, like, how our forces are being used. So, I mean, I'll use an analogy to, like, something you guys can appreciate. If you're the police and you're trying to protect your neighborhood, I mean, how much protection are you going to be giving to a neighborhood if you're not allowed to use force, if you're not allowed to make arrests, if you're not allowed to do such and such? And did these guys actually figure it out that the UN was pretty much like disabling themselves? Heck yeah. Heck yeah. And I think that came across quite clearly. The Belgian soldiers protecting the prime minister, obviously they're pushed aside, they're disarmed, then they're tortured, castrated, and killed. Follow up.
Okay, and then also, so RPF consisted with mostly Tutsi men?
Absolutely. Yep.
So
Yeah.
did they have any, like, Ugandans help them then?
I don't know so much. I think there's like implicit help and so forth. Obviously, if Uganda allows them to exist within their borders, that's help enough.
So also, like, how large was the RPF?
Large enough to beat the Rwandan military. I mean, that's actually a good question. In my mind, I'm thinking, I don't know if they're like, obviously it's kind of like, are there more Tutsis than Hutus in the country? No, but those guys are organized, and they've got some effective fighting ability. Okay? Question here and then there.
So I'm still confused about the timeline. So was it now within 100 days of like
The beginning of the genocide.
it started kind of like April?
Yep. Yeah, it started when the president was killed. Yeah, we've got, what was the actual date? Yeah, 1994. Yep, April 6, 1994. Okay, so it took about 100 days. Okay, Julian, question.
So I had it written down before that you said the RPF was supposed to 50% Tutsi.
No. The agreement that was supposed to be implemented to end the Civil War was the Arusha Agreement, and that was in 1993. And what was supposed to take place was that the Rwandan military was going to end up being comprised of 50% Tutsi, 50% Hutu in the officer corps. I think that came up, the question, somebody else asked that as well, and anticipating that maybe some of the subordinate positions in the military might have more Hutu. But I think that was the goal. Was that ever implemented? No. No. And in fact, that's why the RPF is like, hello, we signed this agreement, you need to implement it. And the president agreed to it, and then the president died on the way back from that meeting. Okay? All right, terrible perpetrators. Meanwhile, murder and rape. Murder, rape. Some Tutsi women and girls kept for weeks on end, months on end, as sex slaves. You can write that down. Yeah, the Japanese would call them comfort women, but they're sex slaves. And you got a little bit of a sense of that from that one scene where the Interhamwe guy was like, yeah, here is Tutsi prostitutes and witches. And so they were being kept for those purposes. Many of them killed, many of them disfigured. This is one guy, write down his name, Jean-Paul Akayesu, who is a mayor of one of the cities, one of the areas in Rwanda. He's going to be the very first to be convicted of genocide, specifically including charges of rape, which is a very, very interesting thing. It occurred in 1998, so this is going to be like within 4 years afterwards. And this is an important breakthrough, because so often, like after World War II and the war crimes tribunals and so forth, you didn't necessarily have people being convicted solely on charges of rape. But the idea that rape is a war crime will come into clear view in Rwanda, as well as when we look at what takes place in the former Yugoslavia. The idea behind rape is to break down the culture and community, because literally it is one of the harshest things you can do, short of torturing and killing somebody, and it occurs primarily to women. You can write that down. Women who, in Rwanda and many other places, are like considered the guardians of the culture. They're just like a critical component of that population. And so rape is, as it's carried out systematically against the females, is going to be considered from here on out, back and after that conflict, as a crime warranting punishment. Got that? Okay? Because I don't think, like after World War II, I don't think you got too many of the Japanese soldiers necessarily being convicted on, solely rape charges and so forth. A lot of the top people. This woman, horrible, Pauline N. I won't even try and go through the whole name of how to pronounce that. She was the Minister of Women and the Family. Okay, so she was a high-ranking government minister. She was convicted for doing this during this genocide period. Deliberately picking out girls for the purposes of being raped by the militia and other men, Hutu men. Okay, so she is going to end up with a life imprisonment. She was the Minister of Women and the Family, so she was a top-rated government minister. It's estimated that between 250,000 and 500,000 girls and women were raped during that particular time period. And 500,000. Of course, some of them raped and then killed, so I don't know if you have to differentiate necessarily. Obviously, you've got a pretty wide range, and you've got some difficulty there. And of course, as we'll see when we get to the situation in the former Yugoslavia, all females and who are raped as girls or whatever don't necessarily want to admit to that. So it makes it a little bit harder to get the data, the specific data on that. Okay? You guys got a pretty clear idea of the extent of all of this going on? Yeah, so there we got the RPF. Ultimately, I mean, it's like at the end of the movie. How many of you guys were like, woohoo, go RPF, shoot those guys in your brightly colored outfits and shirts with scraping machetes on the ground? Didn't feel too much pity for those guys. Not necessarily well armed, but yeah.
Wait, I have a question about that. So if the UN soldiers were taking all the hotel occupants to the camp, how come everyone was walking the opposite direction?
Good question. Anybody can answer that question? Those were Hutus. The biggest group of refugees, and we'll give that in your notes officially later on, is, in fact, even today, is going to be Hutu refugees. Because as the RPF is moving into the country to gather control of the country, the Hutus, they're not necessarily rounding up and killing Hutus. But if you're a Hutu and the RPF is coming, are you concerned? If you're a Hutu and you're somebody who is going to be potentially implicated in murdering your neighbors, are you concerned? Yeah, interesting question. In fact, go ahead, you can write this down. If they're coming in from the north and kind of sweeping in from the east, which direction, if you're a Hutu refugee or a Hutu military or anybody else that wants to get out of the country, where are you going to go? You're going to go west. What's the country just to the west? You look on your maps. What's the country just to the west? It's a big country. Democratic Republic of the Congo. Also known at that time, it was referred to as Zaire. That was the official name back in those days. It's changed its name to confuse people, so now there's two Congos. Okay, Zaire. And that's going to be, there's a whole lot more mess going on. And that's going to be a massive amount of refugees. Yep, that's what's going on with those guys. All right, the international response. Okay, in each of these, we look at the international response. Wow, this is the third bullet point, course of intervention and action. International response. So when the fighting started, when the genocide started, what was the international response? We need to get in there and fix things up and protect these people. No, I think that came through very clearly in the movie. That was one of the most distressing things. And I think that's why I like the Nick Nolte character. He's got a different name in the movie, but essentially that's General Daillet. And I think he comes across quite clearly in the history as being someone who's extremely frustrated at the ineptitude and the lack of response from the West, the United Nations, from the Western countries, from the United States, because it's just pathetic. And what caused it? It's kind of like the Somalia syndrome. Write it down. We got 10 Belgian UN soldiers that are killed, right? So what is Belgium going to do? Send in more soldiers? No, they withdraw them. April 20th, they withdraw the remainder of their soldiers. And of course, Colonel Daillet, who's General Daillet, is actually calling the United Nations to send in more troops. What's that going to do if you're the Rwandan military, the Hutu? Is that going to give you caution or embolden you to carry out and continue carrying out the genocide? It's going to embolden you to do that. I love this quote here. Some people say an intervention would have been useless because they were all dead. They weren't all dead. They were still being killed and slaughtered by the thousands and thousands. This is an interesting point of view that's going to come across quite clearly, and I think the movie that made that point too. Why is it that the black Africans sitting there being slaughtered by the thousands get nothing? Why is it when a bunch of white Europeans get slaughtered in Yugoslavia, you can't put enough capability in there? I'll give you part of the answer, and we'll see this after we've done both units. Part of it has to do with which came first. there was going to be a lot of shame on the part of the international community, particularly the West, that they didn't do enough to save people in Rwanda. So therefore, when things start getting really ugly in the Balkans, there's going to be more of an emphasis to do something about it, particularly on the part of the United States of America. Okay? Although some would look at it and go, it's a race thing. And it's hard to, necessarily pull that apart. But what would be probably one of the things that gave the United States a lot of caution about sending in military into a particular area of Africa that didn't have like a national security implication? Somalia, Black Hawk Down. Remember what happened there? We were trying to help people out there, and we got all shot up and so forth. And you're like, well, you can go back and look at the mission and see how you could do it differently and be more effective. Or you can just throw your hands up and go, oh my gosh, there's just too many countries in the world. Too many hateful, mean, terrible peoples. Yeah. Could they have helped more? Could President Clinton have helped more? Could Francois Mitterrand? You can write his name down. He's the president of France. Okay. Yeah, let's get into the details here. Yeah, some of it's like not. Some of it you're going to be like, are you kidding me? Oh my gosh. All right, here we go. All right. So the Belgians withdrew their troops, UN troops, on April 20th, right? So this is in the early stages. So that's like, what, within a couple of weeks after it started? And we still have like 2 more months to go of genocide. The next day, April 21st, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution with respect to Rwanda to reduce the size of the force to just 270 soldiers altogether. Did you got that? So April 21st, they voted to reduce the size of the UNAMIR, the UN force, to just 270. Total. 270 soldiers. I don't know, let me see. We already had the Belgians being removed. If you go back and look in your notes, I'm trying to see here. Let me see. Initially, UN promised 8,000, but only sent 2,500. Dallier was asking for more, so it went from 2,500 all the way down to 270. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why I think it's quite clear in the movie. It's kind of like, where are your forces? Who's going to protect you? Dallier was actually trying to get the British, the French, the United States to come in to send their troops. But they are not in favor of getting the United Nations in to stop violence. And in fact, this is what is really kind of irritating. There was no further condemnation at the time of the Rwandan government, and that didn't come until just before the RPF won their final victory. So near the tail end of it. Got that? Even as reports are coming in as to the extent of the atrocities. And here's the thing. This is what's really frustrating. You got a little bit of a sense in there. The United Nations had an obligation, a treaty obligation on the part of various different people in there to come in and help when genocide is taking place. That's what the international law said. And so I kind of interrupted in the film a little bit because they actually had real-life footage of the White House spokesperson who was saying that there were acts of genocide, maybe, and so forth. Because you're obligated as a country, if there's genocide, to actually do something about it. But if it's like a civil war and there's a little bit of genocide here, a little bit of genocide there, then you can sort of go, what are we supposed to do? So, they refused to call it genocide, therefore they didn't have an obligation to actually do anything about it at the time. Dallier blames the British, the French, and the United States for inaction, and thereby aiding and abetting genocide. Oh, but wait! There were Belgian and French soldiers sent in. Write that down. Make sure you have that. And we saw that in the movie. Ashton, what were the Belgian, French soldiers, what were they doing there? You remember that?
Didn't they join
Exactly. Yeah, pick up the white people. Yeah. They just went in there to rescue their own citizens. And that was made quite clear in the movie. It's called like, no Rwandans, no Rwandans. That are not helping these people. Okay? Of course, many of the Belgian soldiers themselves felt shame at leaving the situation, but they're under orders. They can't go, oh, can't stick around here. France, I mean, they were supporters of the military, providing weapons and support to the Rwandan military before that. Okay? And they really weren't that keen on the RPF coming in with a victory. And you're like, why weren't they keen? Because the RPF were operating out of Uganda, and Uganda is closer to Britain. I'm like, seriously? Because the RPF is close to Uganda, and Uganda is closer to Britain, and therefore Britain is a rivalry with France. Hello, Britain and France, you guys are friends now? Maybe economic rivals as far as, and there is a bit of that economic rivalry, because the British maintains close relations with its former countries, colonies, and so forth in Africa, and the French does as well. So this is the one that's just crazy. Hang on just a sec. This is crazy. So when the French sent their troops in to pull out the civilians and so forth, they actually delivered some things. Hey, whatever. If you're going to Rwanda, can you drop these off? 5 tons of ammunition for the Hutu-based Rwandan military. So in other words, instead of making things better, they actually continued following the contractual obligations to deliver the ammunition that was expected by the Rwandan military. Yeah. Critics of Mitterrand refer to him as Mitterhamwe. I like that one. Do you like that? Mitterhamwe. Instead of François Mitterrand, François Mitterhamwe. Whatever. Yes. At that particular time. Yeah, before they had been providing weapons because they were like a military contractor with the Rwandan government. Okay? Afterwards, there's going to be a whole lot of well, maybe we should have been a little bit more circumspect and a little bit more thoughtful and so forth. Oh, if you heard me correctly, when the planes went in with the French soldiers to pull out the so-called white people, they're French citizens and so forth, the planes that flew in were delivering 5 tons of ammunition. It's kind of like, while you're up, while you're off on an errand, while you're driving around, have you guys ever had your parents do that? You're going someplace and they're like, oh, can you drop this off, this, that, and you're like, sure, I'm a shuttle service. Yeah, so it's like, sure, we can have planes. I mean, the irony there is we're going to have planes to take white people out of Rwanda because of the dangers to the white people. As for the danger to the Tutsis in Rwanda, well, I suppose you could say the danger was increased because of the increased amount of ammunition. Yeah, but do you need ammunition? I mean, the Chinese, in a sense, Ashton, the Chinese, don't get comfortable. We still got some stuff going on here. The Chinese made a buck, just on the international market of selling really, really cheap stuff. How many of you guys ever bought really, really cheap stuff from China? How many of you guys bought lots of machetes in order to foment a hate-based rebellion within your community? Good, good. I'm glad that there's no hands up on that. That's good. I'm so proud of you. Woo! Let's hear about America. Woo! So, what did America do? Afterwards, President Clinton looked back at his role during this whole thing. Write it down. He ignored evidence of genocide for 2 whole months, calling it acts of genocide, therefore blocking the United Nations' efforts to send troops. Yeah, I mean, he's in charge of the foreign policy at the time. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, let's not do this, let's not do this. Because we didn't want another Somalia, right? Yeah. But then, afterwards, he's like, yeah, that didn't work out very well. So what do you get from President Clinton? An apology. Exactly. There you go. An apology. So this is just under 4 years from the genocide taking place. He went to Rwanda, and I'll actually play. You can hear the apology for yourself. He apologized for what had taken place and the lack of the United States role. I'll let him speak for it. Although it's interesting, here's my critique. Look for the pronouns. How often does he refer to, I take personal responsibility, as opposed to the royal we, as in we, the United States, or we, the Western community? Let's hear from President Clinton. This is in 1998.
Let me thank you, Mr. President, and Vice President Kagame, and your wives for making Hillary and me and our delegation feel so welcome. I'd also like to thank the young students who met us, and the musicians, the dancers who were outside. I thank especially the survivors of the genocide and those who are working to rebuild your country for spending a little time with us before we came in here. I have a great delegation of Americans with me, leaders of our government, leaders of our Congress, distinguished American citizens. We are all very grateful to be here. We thank the diplomatic corps for being here, the members of the Rwandan government, and especially the citizens. I have come today to pay the respects of my nation to all who suffered and all who perished in the Rwandan genocide. And it is my hope that through this trip in every corner of the world today and tomorrow, your story will be told. That 4 years ago in this beautiful, green, lovely land, a clear and conscious decision was made by those then in power that the peoples of this country would not live side by side in peace. During the 90 days that began on April 6th in 1994, Rwanda experienced the most intensive slaughter in this blood-filled century we are about to leave. Families murdered in their homes, people hunted down as they fled by soldiers and militia, through farmland and woods as if they were animals. From Kibuye in the west to Kibongo in the east, people gathered seeking refuge in churches by thousands, in hospitals and schools. And when they were found, the old and the sick, women and children alike, they were killed. Killed because their identity card said they were Tutsi, or because they had a Tutsi parent, or because someone thought they looked like a Tutsi, or slain like thousands of Hutus because they protected Tutsis, or would not countenance a policy that sought to wipe out people who just the day before and for years before had been their friends and neighbors. The government-led effort to exterminate Rwanda's Tutsi and moderate Hutus, as you know better than me, took at least 1 million lives. Scholars of these sorts of events say that the killers armed mostly with machetes and clubs nonetheless did their work 5 times as fast as the mechanized gas chambers used by the Nazis. It is important that the world know that these killings were not spontaneous or accidental. It is important that the world hear what your president just said. They were most certainly not the result of ancient tribal struggles. Indeed, these people had lived together for centuries before the events the president described began to unfold. These events grew from a policy aimed at the systematic destruction of the people. The ground for violence was carefully prepared. The airways poisoned with hate, casting the Tutsis as scapegoats for the problems of Rwanda, denying their humanity. All of this was done clearly to make reluctant people to participate in wholesale slaughter. The international community, together with nations in Africa, must bear its share of responsibility for this tragedy as well. We did not act quickly enough after the killing began. We should not have allowed the refugee camps to become safe haven for the killers. We did not
We'll get into that.
call these crimes by their rightful name, genocide. We cannot change the past, but we can and must do everything in our power to help you build a future without fear.
Okay. The United Nations, write this down, 1997, an inquiry, it took them a few years, but they concluded, accurately, that the United Nations actually failed to stop the genocide. Duh. Yeah. We turn our attention next to impact. Okay? Impact. 10% of the population is dead. 75% of those that are dead are Tutsi. You're going to have a lot of other people dead in addition to that. A massive refugee crisis, and Jackson, which is going to be the biggest group of refugees by the end of this crisis? The Hutu, yeah. And you're going to find most of those ones in Zaire, and it's going to be real complicated because in those camps, you're going to have Hutu refugees as well as escaped murderers. Oh, and by the way, Zaire, it's not the best place to have a whole bunch of refugee camps because, as we'll see, and I'll detail this more as well, you actually already know this because that was the Congo, the Belgian Congo, lots and lots of instability there. So we'll spell this out and we'll wrap this up as far as Rwanda next time. Wipe her down and head on to your next class.
Nice map.